Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 14 of the All Blue Podcast. I am Yonas here, recently back from Lille, and we have Hrvoje, also recently back. How are you doing?
Oh, doing fine. Well rested. I assume you're a bit more jet lagged, having traveled the Atlantic.
And Kai in Japan right after a work shift. How are you doing today?
Yeah, also a little bit jet lagged. I've come off of a 12-hour work shift, feeling tired, but I'm unfortunately not back from Lille, but I'm here in the podcast to talk about how it went for you guys.
Yeah, I'm excited to kind of talk about it and the OP15 meta, at least is how it's been developing over in the West. Before we jump into that, I kind of wanted to start today with a question of the week just to ask from the recent Twitter post from the All Blue. From Glaub's OP15, Hrvoje, let's start with you. What is the biggest mistake you frequently see higher level players do in your games?
Oh, that's a really difficult question, but I think the one that's easiest to answer, because it kind of always has the highest impact on the end result of the game, is how people go for lethals. That's one of those things that's the basic of the basics, but I often see even the best players just go on autopilot mode and just swing 7s or 9s instead of thinking of how to incorporate their usually smaller bodies into having a correct lethal, or just doing the regular staircase when the staircase is correct instead of doing equal swings. So I think that's just a minute detail, but that's probably the one that has the most immediate impact. So I figure we're answering these questions the first thing that comes to mind. So that's definitely what came up for me.
I do have to preface that I wouldn't consider myself a high-level player. I'm just a high-level yapper. So I can't really say what high-level players are actually messing up per se. But one thing that I do notice that just in general a lot of players do, including high-level players, that I don't necessarily always agree with, is how much people change their deck list right before tournaments. I do feel to some extent there's importance in understanding the feeling of playing the decks. When you know the odds of your deck because you've played that exact 50 for a long time, I think that there is some confidence that you get from playing the same list over and over again, even if you feel maybe you can try a certain test card. If that card's not fully tested, you may end up regretting that on the day. So I do feel just in terms of an actual game day, confidence is one of the most important things, and I think that being unconfident in the 50 that you're running is going to be a detriment. So that'd be my one tip, I guess.
Ooh, okay. I like both those answers. I'll give my own 2 cents because I also have something I wanted to say about this. And I think it's about countering a little bit too aggressively in the mid game. Not in terms of taking life versus not, but in terms of when you counter during sequences of attacks. I see a lot of players mess this up even in super late into a tournament. The very common example is your opponent swings 6 with a character and they have 1 extra Dawn in their leader. And a lot of times people will kind of predict a 6 and a 6 and will just kind of counter out of 1 6 and then take the other one. However, a lot of times the person might only swing a 5 and then play a 1-cost searcher or do something like that. And because of that, they end up countering out of the first 6k swing and then just taking a 5 and kind of wasting a load of extra counter. A lot of times it just makes sense to kind of force your opponent to make that decision about whether they want to commit that extra Dawn before you end up countering. And it might not seem like much, but I think a lot of people mess up that inaccuracy. And a lot of times when people lose 3 or 4 turns down later in the game, they're just down 1k counter. And that does compile and that does add up over time. I'm not sure if you guys have noticed that a lot.
I notice myself doing
For sure,
that
it happens to me sometimes as well. So I'm not gonna. I hope it doesn't, but it probably does. I made some mistakes over the weekend. I'm not proud of.
But yeah, I appreciate Glob's TCG for giving the question, and I hope to have some more questions for next week so we can kind of pilfer through and ask, because I think these questions kind of help everyone, so it's a win-win. But let's jump right into OP15 meta and how Lille and the most recent Red Bull event has went over in the West. So let's first talk about Lille. It was a great event for me. I can't complain. I was fortunate enough to get top 8 with Purple and L. Hrvoje also had a great run in top 32, losing to Zamatio, playing in top 32, playing Nami. So without die roll, definitely a hard matchup. Let's start with you, Hrvoje. How did you feel about the event in general? How did you feel about your prep? And let's talk a little bit about the set cards that you ended up bringing in your deck.
So I was very confident in how we prepped for the event. By way, I mean Business Center, because Luca, Flash, Fabi, and pretty much everybody was grinding. And at the point we figured out the Gamma plus forecast build, we were all like pretty confident we want to bring this deck to Lille. And we had a bit of a problem keeping it down low and testing it without like exposing it on ladder. And I don't want to make any like conceited notions that like we figured out like and then leaked it. It was like probably something that was figured out independently by a lot of testing groups, because ultimately there is like not that many 6-cost roller cards you can find in purple. And once you play Gamma Knife and Mamaraga and something, and you realize, wow, I have like full board control, all I need to do is develop something on the turns I remove opponent's characters. Like the progress in testing just goes from there. And the tech cards we included to complement that package were Senor Pink, which I think was almost omnipresent in the topping builds in Lille, by pretty much all the good players, and Frankie, which is like contests the forecast Raju spot in a way, which was the other popular choice. Except we found it like it adds a lot more to the consistency, both of the curve if you play him earlier, and in late game it allows you to greed a lot more with some of the non-counter cards in the deck, such as Senor Pink himself and Lightning Dragon, because you can like kind of postpone the decision of what stays in hand when it gets played, because you can just discard it with Frankie if it does end up being a brick, which is something that we felt Reiju actually went in the opposite direction, where if you keep Senor Pink and Reiju in hand, if you play the Reiju, now you kept the brick in hand, but also if you actually want to minus for leader ability in this turn, you also need to like cycle an event which is a 2k or a 1 cost which is a 1k, and then you're potentially like further bricking your hand instead of filtering the bricks out. And then the only like real upside is having this free block, which is only efficient if the swings are like not also demanding you to counter alongside the free block, because most of your counters do not work with non-NL characters. So yeah, we just kind of focus on consistency in executing this combo of Senor Pink and Gamaragan, which takes care of pretty much everybody in the meta currently, except Tenko's Newgate, for which there exists Divine Departure. And yeah, this kind of control-focused build, which we just called Miracle NL because the Miracle moniker became so popular in Riftbound over the last months. It just felt so good, like improved pretty much every matchup the deck has, significantly improved the mirror. Like I think people who played mirror without Senor Pink and Gammas like very quickly realized how much trouble they're in and how like pretty much hopeless the game is for them even going first. Whereas the players with this package going first are going to be very dominant in mirror, and then a bunch of matchups become free, like Lucy and Green decks. Actually, that was another reason why we felt this Miracle package was pretty good with Gamma Knife. I think I mentioned it in previous podcasts. Like Electric Luna is the only problem if they have a board to like attack with on the turn. They stole your board with a freeze, and this just removes everything they ever play on the board. Like you can remove every Lucy the Lucy plays, every Sanji Pudding GP plays, every Luffy or Sanji that Red Green Luffy plays. So it just felt like a very dominant strategy, and we were highly confident going into the event. We ended up with Christian, Luca, me, and Flash topping at the regional. A few more getting top 64, but most of us ran into Blue Yellow Nami, and the one who didn't ran into Yonas, so could have been a bit luckier. But then there were still some good performances, like top 8 by Hano in the Treasure Cup, and then also actually two friends we gave our list to, like last minute on Friday, Sandra from Croatia and Zixa from Germany. They also got, I think, 6th and 10th place in the Treasure Cup on Sunday as well. So, all in all, like a pretty good weekend for the build and for our testing group. We just didn't have any flashy serials as opposed to you, Jonas. So let me hear how your weekend went and what your choices were. Because I know there was one very interesting one that we disagreed on.
Yeah, so honestly, a lot of my testing was pretty kind of hectic going into last week. I think I kind of noticed how dominant Senor Pink was basically the Monday before. But the power level was definitely there. I noticed how silly Gamma Knife plus Reiju was, but I was definitely running out of cards. And like Senor Pink definitely helped accompany it. And kind of relying on that 2-card engine was kind of what my plan was going into this regional. I just didn't know how kind of perverse and degenerate other people were going to get with their deck, whether they were going to go up to 4 senior pinks, find other ways to generate card advantage to make the mirror even slower. I noticed that, like, yeah, basically when, like Hrvoje was talking about, the deck, when using Mamoragan and Gamma Knife, basically gets to make every other deck kind of play at the level of the small ball characters, because the best way to beat an L is try to invalidate the 10k bodies and invalidate the small stuff that they're doing in some way, shape, or form. And the most common ways to do that are Nami becoming a 7k leader, and then the green decks playing Electrical Luna. And Lucy, to some extent as well, can just like eventually play at about 9k bodies to kind of invalidate everything. And now the Senior Pink Gamma Knife kind of engine kind of stops the green decks and the Lucy deck from ever like mustering any board if you're kind of able to keep up with it. The question is whether you're able to find all those pieces, which is like the main issue. I didn't really have too much problems with consistency, but that might be a little bit of I only played like so many games compared to like a testing group that would play like maybe 5 times as many games as I and my partner would ever be able to do. So I ended up trying to find some other way to try to generate some value in the mirror, and that was with 1-cost Shura, and instead of playing the 1-cost Satori. I know a lot of people kind of defaulted to just always playing Ohm, Satori, and putting in their deck, especially in Japan. Anecdotally, it felt like Satori was always prime target number 1 for my opponent whenever they attacked it or removed it with Elthor. And also, there were a lot of moments in the mirror, especially when my opponent was able to kind of beat me on the 1-drops, like maybe have like 2 to 3 more than I had, and I didn't have enough attacks to like pressure those 1-drops without having to like waste a bunch of like leader 5k swings, and that generated a lot of value for my opponent. So I wanted a way to win mirrors when that snowballed, and it felt like Shura was like the least opportunity cost way to do so. I didn't really do too much math in terms of whether Satori would be that much more beneficial than having the Shura, and maybe that is a little bit different, but I need to do that math myself, and it's a little bit very, very complicated from my side, so I'm not entirely sure if it's worth it, but I really liked how Shura performed all week. But I didn't really test too much of like the rogue matchups, and almost all my testing was playing the mirror, playing yellow Luffy, playing Nami, and then playing Lucy and red-green Luffy. And all those matchups felt fine with the exception of Nami, and that's kind of why I kind of ended up playing 3 Reijus. I didn't really find the Frankie blocker tech that the Business Center was able to find, so I didn't really play too much of it. But it's something I really want to explore, and I think some other people in the West, most notably the Double Dawn players, ended up playing Frankie alongside Reiju, which I thought was quite interesting, so I'll have to explore that later. But as for the exact tournament, I played a pretty comfortable Swiss. I think I played against a lot of Anels. I did lose a lot of die rolls in the Anel mirrors, but the Senior Pink Gamma Knife engine was so powerful it didn't matter. And I was able to kind of avoid Nami throughout my entire tournament. And as for Top Cut, it was just all purple Anels. Gianni in top 16, Mirko in top 8, and Luca as well. So it kind of all got worse and worse. But I had die roll in 2 of those, which is like really important. And against Gianni, I won like a very, very tight game, mostly because I got super lucky with his life being bricks. But the fact that his deck only had 2 Senior Pinks versus mine having 3, alongside only 2 Gamma Knives in his versus my 3, definitely gave me a huge edge, which was super nice. I know we kind of like blabbered on nonstop, Kai, but I'm curious like if you have any questions about the Senior Pink build and what kind of costs you think it has.
And is there like any movement or like notions about the cards in Japan nowadays? Because I assume people, now that the formats are like kind of equalizing, are people actually looking at the Western meta more and more, or is it still like a separate world?
No, I think people have been looking at it because I've seen the price of Senior Pink's alt art go from like 300 yen to 1,000 yen. So definitely people have been picking up on it and people are starting to run it. And I do think that the lack of Senior Pink in Japanese builds is part of the reason why people were defaulting to Satori over Shura, because most people's builds were just running maybe not the maximum of 8, but they were running anywhere from like 6 to 7 6 costs within the deck, the 6 cost Secret NL as well as the SR NL. And so therefore you didn't have as much time to play Shura and give it rush on the same turn unless you were at least in the sort of like Japanese NL context low rolling, I guess, because the high roll was to just keep playing a 6 cost every single turn, and that kind of made the game plan a little bit more binary. And then people were starting to find more interesting techs. People were doing things like Reiju, Gamma Knife, but I do think that the Senior Pink tech is a purely Western thing. I'm still not 100% sure if I prefer the Senior Pink tech over the SRNL, but it may just be because of the sort of difference in meta, because also in Japan we still have to worry about the Quasar Borsellino combo as well, because that's still not banned for us as well, so we do need to worry about Blue Yellow Nami a lot more, so the 10,000 power stat line does help a lot right now. So for that reason, I'm still running the SRNL, just big body blocker, also gives you a little bit of flexibility when you're going for lethal, being able to trigger your effect several times and whatnot. I do think that it's just a generally solid card to have within the meta. So I need to see exactly how vital Senior Pink and how many copies it's necessary, especially because not many people are running it currently in Japan, how it's going to play out. But I do think it's one of those things that's starting to catch on. So it's going to be very interesting to see exactly how much the East is going to copy the West and how much it's going to differ. I guess one card that I haven't seen like at all in the East was the Frankie tech, and I was going to ask you about that, Hrvoje, but you explained it very nicely for me, so I have less questions about that. I do also agree that like the Reiju, like the free block from the 7,000 power stat line was nice, but then I felt like I played the Reiju and now I want to minus a Dong in some way, and a lot of times meant that I was going to be using 2k counters from my hand to do so, to get back that Dong. And then so just being able to play down the Frankie, and also because you're technically getting one card back, you can kind of justify that as a free block in a way, because you're just getting the resource back that you would have been defending yourself from with that Reiju free block, with the flexibility of being able to get rid of some of those bricks in your hand. Because especially with my build where I'm still running the SRNL, a lot of times I feel like I want to keep playing out those NLs because I have no other way of filtering them out of my hand. So I do think that that's a pretty smart tech. I'm going to definitely try that in the next coming days. But it is very exciting though, and one thing I've been looking forward to for the past year, that finally the West is caught up to the East in a way. Yes, there's like small differences in the start decks, of course. Start deck 30 came out in Japan very recently, but we haven't seen anything all too significant from that quite yet. And other than that, though, the West having the ban list in action is actually ahead of the East for the first time ever. So I can look to you guys and have you guys teach me about this meta.
Yeah, it's definitely a very novel time for us because we're just trying to figure things out. And honestly, it's kind of terrifying because it's hard to kind of keep up if you don't have like a very well established like group of people to test with, because I think this tournament specifically kind of indicated how powerful an information gap can be, especially week one of a tournament. Because for the most part in North America, most of the information asymmetries that exist are just knowledge about how to execute your deck. Like how to play Dofi a little bit better than your opponent, or how to play BY a little bit better than your opponent was a lot of the equity that you'd gain, because for the most part, like lists were like 48 out of 50 the same. But now, like finding a tech card and exploiting it, especially week one of a meta, can just be enough power to end up like having you do very, very well in a tournament. So the business center is like a very like key example of how like having one strong testing group can just lead to like a large majority of people end up making top cut. And Lille was probably one of the most stacked top cuts I've seen in a very long time. So that kind of shows you how much that matters.
Yeah, there is actually maybe something that I want to explain that happens a lot in the Japanese meta and then follow it up with a question. What you're describing right now happens basically every single time. I'm sure in any card game, but like in the Japanese One Piece card game scene as well. There's a lot of day one tournaments, and then, for example, when NL lists were still developing, first person to put Divine Departure in their list, everyone was like, what? You can put power reduction into the list? And then so just like for the first week of OP15, for example, in Japan, there's just like everyone was putting in 4 Divine Departures into their deck, and it was like the most broken thing, and like that was enough to win basically. And then from there it like developed a little bit more. There's a period where people are putting even more 6 costs, so things like the 6 cost Rosnante and Law and whatnot, and just eventually the meta develops. But I do think that a lot of times people will see deck lists that do very well initially and then bandwagon on that, which is why we a lot of times see the meta progress much slower than it actually should, because a lot of people are kind of stuck in this echo chamber called twitter.com, which is, I won't say more than that. But so my question is, now that this sort of, I don't know if it was a secret or I don't know to what extent it was a secret, because at least in the East, we had things like Reiju, we had things like Gamma Knife. I think the only tech card that we didn't have in mind was Senor Pink. But now that people know that the Senor Pink tech exists, do deck lists evolve further than that? Do people just automatically put in 4 Senor Pinks now into the deck? How do you feel like deck lists may evolve now that there's sort of been a precedent set?
So what I think this type of deck list evolution will do to the meta is kind of comparable to what happened with Sakazuki in OP05, but in Asia, where people just play the play on the curve Sakazuki, play bigger bodies, remove, and then people discovered Rebecca Hinauchi, and this feels very comparable to that, where you have this more compact form of a turn that removes the opposing big body, so it's just more efficient to go like wide with these smaller bodies, which are still like sufficiently strong to be attackers, rather than commit into these big guys that take up a full turn and then get removed because you don't really have a good way to protect them. So what I think this will do for the mirror is it's going to make them a lot more reliant on seeing the pieces. It's going to make them last longer, and yes, it might result in a mini game or like a deck building war of who puts in more Senor Pinks and Gammas to make sure they can catch the opponent off guard. But as Yonas said, it also might result in an increase in like the techs in the 1-cost slots, so you don't lose the 1-cost war or the pawn war, which is how we dubbed it, because both Shura and Gedatsu have like Shura more so, but they both have purposes in the mirror where it makes it harder for you to lose the war on the board, which is like on the human level. It's not the gods fighting at the 6-cost range. It's just the 1-cost like fighting for basic supremacy, which translates directly to hand, life, and board advantage. So yeah, I'm not sure how exactly deck lists are going to develop, but this is like where the fun part of the meta really begins, because as Jonas pointed out, it wasn't really even footing for all the players in LoL, because if you had a good group to prepare with, which a lot of known players do have, you had a way higher chances to top than if you were just doing stuff solo, testing on sim, and like reading online discords or stuff where people are maybe bandwagoning on the Porch engine or playing Heats or whatever, like cards which generally don't accomplish much in the mirror or in any other matchup. So yeah, I think this is where we'll really see more and more optimizations in play patterns in the mirror, and in pretty much every other matchup as well, as people walk into this more control style list. And yeah, I like these formats. So if this ends up being a tier 0 format, I will be a fan, even though I know it will frustrate a lot of people, sadly.
Yeah. I do have a bit of a follow-up question, if you don't mind. Let's say hypothetically that this does become a tier 0 format for NL. There's nothing else that you should be playing except for maybe the Thriller Bark Nami, for example. But if NL proves to be too problematic, is there a card that you think that can be hit to actually take down the power level of this deck? You guys are both nodding yes. I also have my opinions, but I'll let Jonas go first because he started nodding first.
Yeah, when I heard this from Dog of Wisdom, shout out Enrico, I 100% agreed. He said that Mamaraga needed to be banned immediately or eventually. I thought like there's a lot of cards that you could try to mess around with, but I think that the removal place pattern existing as things get played in this deck is like fundamentally just like unfair with a super powerful aggro core. And the fact that you can just get the rest in Gamma Knife anything kind of basically for free in this purpose of the deck is just so ridiculous that it's just not really fair. The card advantage is neutral, it draws a card, and also just like it has this absurd counter mode. All those things kind of compounded made this card kind of like number one list on my mind of probably shouldn't exist in this color combination or in this deck or in this core. And it's already seen play in other decks like GP. So I think that card's probably at the peak of the power level amongst all the cards in the deck, but I'm curious if Hrvoje has any other contenders.
So the first card that came to mind for me was Gamma Knife, because it's basically Ice Age, though I do think Mamaraga is bannable as well, for different reasons though, because Gamma Knife, I think very cheap spells that accomplish a lot are never going to be very balanced, and this is limited to just NL effectively, not like I guess Rosinante also used it a fair bit, but for its cost, it creates a really huge power differential on the board. And yeah, I don't know if they found Ice Age worthy of the ban, then I think Gamma Knife also kind of deserves it as we move away from, effect removal because of all the protection and move to power-based or generally combat-based removal. But yeah, the problem with Mama Ragan is one I've voiced like in various discussions several times, private ones. I don't think I've mentioned on the podcast yet, but basically it introduces the Dragon Ball mechanic of a super combo into one piece, where we already kind of had it with Giant, but like you have 4 copies of a card that just freely extend your counter range every time. And then this is just, like at least in Dragon Ball, the super combo cards are completely unplayable. Like they're effectively 4K, but complete garbage, useless effect. You would never play this card ever. But Mamaragan has dual mode, which is randomly a really good effect for board control, pushing for lethal. It depends on the deck. But I don't mind the card seeing play in decks like GP Luffy. I kind of like the innovation. But in context of NL, where the -2 don't affect the first part of the effect is free, I think ends up being very oppressive. But the first card that came to mind for me was the Gamma Knife.
Yeah, my answer to that question would have been Gamma Knife as well. Actually, there was a video that popped up on my feed this morning, which made me think about it a lot, from Zell TCG. Shout out to him, good player from North America, I believe. And he was also talking about how Gamma Knife is problematic, just being able to introduce these sorts of board control elements to a more aggro-focused, the way that NL is supposed to be built, but you also have the ability to not only reduce the opponent's power, but also be able to combo that with the ability to rest them immediately, essentially for free, just because it's the 2 dong, but you do have to -3 dong to use all of those cards together. But with your leader effect, it's all free. And that Mamaragang being free, both as a main effect and as a counter effect, because you're always going to be at 6 or less dong, in NL specifically, just feels very, very oppressive. So I think that you can go either which way. I think that the big problem with NL, though, is that specific combo between those 2 cards. So I'm glad that we were able to talk about both of them. We've spent, looking at our timer, we spent like a little over 25 minutes just talking about purple NL purely, but I do think that it is kind of the core of OP15, and it's just going to be how you can respond to those decks. Maybe a good place to take this discussion now that we've talked about NL extensively, although we can still pop back here and there, would be to look at some of the other decks that have performed well in Lille, because of course NL, though he was a majority of the top cut, was only 15 out of the 32. Well, only.
Yeah, I think if you saw the discussions online, when people saw the pie chart, it was not like only 15. It was like, oh my god, it's tier 0 again. But
to be fair,
luckily for top 16 and top 8 charts, a lot of those NLs either played mirrors or against Nami. So yeah, maybe people would be a lot more upset about it if NLs got brackets that just put them into top 8s more consistently. But yeah, I think Nami was the second most represented deck with 7 representatives in top 32, and a decent chunk of them, maybe all of them, making top 16 on the back of most of them facing NL, actually. And no, okay, Christian beat Nami in top 32, so I guess that was at least one Nami out. But yeah, Nami, despite what I said in the earlier podcast, is not favored for NL. Like, not even slightly. Like, you always have to fight uphill. And for me, unfortunately, I ran into a very, a typical list running a bunch of good cards that turns out is really, really difficult for NL to beat, just because it heals way more than the usual lists, and it plays, actual cards, which reduce the chances of it breaking and just have a more consistent and powerful plan. It's possible it can be adapted to. I just didn't have the practice for it and ended up paying the price. But yeah, Nami probably going to be in a similar position to Mihawk in the last format, where NL is a really good deck. If you play it really well, you're going to top because there's so many easy matchups, kind of comparable to Imu. But Nami, if you actually make it to top cut and there's this sea of NLs and you just keep running into NLs, you're going to be feeling really good about your chances to walk away with the serial Luffy. I'm not sure, maybe we were underrating Nami even when we placed her in A tier in our tier list, but she does feel like, I'm not sure, but she has some of those matchups that she loses to complete random decks that NL stomps. They annoy me so much. You kind of have to get fortunate with your bracket, even in top 32, because the good stuff Nami that I was talking about, I believe he lost to Lucy in in top 16 because that Lucy guy ran into top 32 Nami, top 16 Nami, and then top 8 Nami as well. So there's always going to be some bracket luck involved in the jungle. But in general, odds should be in your favor if you make it to top cut with Nami, purely off of the number of NLs that are expected to top. But yeah. And actually, I was maybe even thinking starting to prepare Nami for Warsaw, but I'm not going to get ahead of myself. For now, it's just optimizing NL for the matchup further. Maybe taking more cards like the Forecast Rage Blocker and the Discard Law.
Yeah, I do think Nami probably should need to be an S tier. I do think it's a little bit worse than an L just because of the rest of the matchup spreads. But Nami still does have some like very, very easy matchups. Like Yellow Luffy and Kagura are just like very, very free. Just because the fact that you get to be a 7k leader is just like very, very potent against the other yellow decks. But yeah, Nami does have a couple problems, and the fact that it does have issues with decks that can just kind of invalidate the board. And I do think it kind of struggles against these green decks a little bit as well. So I do think like Nami is just going to hope to play against 10 NLs in Swiss and 10 NLs in Top Cut. But given how powerful an L is, it's like weirdly probable. So I think it's like quite reasonable in that way.
Would this be comparable to something like Blue Purple Luffy and Bella Betty, or do you think that there's a little bit of different factors at play?
As much as I dislike the Nami deck at its core, I do think it's just like a fair amount stronger in terms of power level than Bello Betty. I think Bello Betty was just like a very, very potent deck against the best deck, but kind of like fell flat against a lot of the other stuff. I do think Nami has like a much better matchup spread than Bello Betty ever did.
I'm not sure about the comparison. If that's what the pause is about, I feel like it might be similar enough position. Like Betty was more reliant on avoiding like 100% lose matchups, which Nami doesn't really have. Arguably, maybe Lucy, if they can remove everything Nami plays. But Nami at least still has a chance in every matchup. There's like no 7-cost buggy blocking out your entire board. So yeah, she should be better positioned than Betty was. And knowing that Betty won multiple tournaments in OP11, in fact, I think the majority of the tournaments in the beginning of the format, bodes well for Nami. Like, she already walked away with one win, and I guess the Red Bull event, we didn't talk about that much because there was some purple NLs there as well, but Red Green Luffy walked away with a win there. But Nami's were second and third, I believe. Mm-hmm. So already like putting up very dominant top cut performances. So yeah, she might just have the throne secured in these top cut structured tournaments, because I don't believe the Treasure Cup was won by, I'm forgetting what actually.
Was it Yellow Luffy?
I think it was the Yellow Luffy was second, but might have been first actually.
I also forget. I thought it was Yellow Luffy, but
you might be right. I just kind of didn't pay attention because two of my friends missed out. Like Bubbled Out got 5th and 6th, so yeah, sad times. But that was lucky for Kyle, right? Because he was 4th. Yeah. But somebody like Kyle, who was down in tiebreakers just like shot up to 3rd place and put everybody else like at least from our group down. But yeah, Nami should be positioned really well. Like as I said, I'm tempted to take her to the next big tournament. So I guess that should be saying enough about how I feel about her position in the meta. Because if there's any time you want to win, or at least top cut in One Piece, it's now when prices of pricing are kind of insane.
There are many versions of Nami, as we talked about when we were creating the tier list. We didn't know exactly which version of Nami would end up being the best. You were also mentioning before that the version that you lost to incorporated lots of healing, which I do want to inquire of because you don't have the Borsa Quasar combo. But hypothetically, if you were to bring Nami, what version of Nami do you think is the best right now?
Well, I'm drawn to the good stuff version, which just runs a lot more like real cards. It doesn't really have any triggers, so there is like none of the extreme luck potential. I think the only trigger in Maurizio's list was the Rayleigh that destroys the 7k base character. But I just think that the combination of all those good cards gives it a better matchup spread into like pretty much everything in the meta, because against Red Green Luffy, like the Rayleighs can take out the Luffys, the Sanjis. Against the GP, it can take out Sanji Pudding, and so on and so on. And yeah, it just kind of doesn't break because there's always going to have it's always going to have a good play, and more importantly, it's going to have a good play on 6 Dawn, which I think is like the most critical turn for Nami not to brick on, because it's the first turn she actually gets to put a real body down. Like with the Thriller Bark package, you can kind of do it on 4 Dawn already, but then you're like exposing yourself for a turn of very early aggression from Enel in particular if you play like Kikunojo or hard play Perona or Hogback, because they can just go 6-6 or 6-7, and at that point you are giving up cards earlier than you would like to, at least the real counters. So yeah, I would lean towards good stuff list. Like the lists are public. You guys, I think, should be able to find them somewhere online. There was a Google document, and yeah, I would go with something resembling Mauricio's Nami list, which I joked to him, like he basically made the turn Nami into Shanks, kind of, where you just play these big guys on curve and stall out for a while.
I do think that version of Nami is kind of a product of how we've kind of developed the NL deck, because on its face, like playing a bunch of removal is like actively bad against the traditional versions of NL we see in Japan, especially when people are just playing like 8 or 6 to 8 of just like the 6-drop NLs. These can't be removed by effects. But since we're trying to play a lot of cards like 4-cost Reiju, 4-cost Frankie, 5-cost Senior Pink, it does allow the NL deck to be a lot more vulnerable to just like random removal throughout the game. And that does make the versions of this Nami deck a lot better in terms of like removing all of NL's board. And it also randomly makes decks like Ace better as well. Imagine a deck that just like really kind of doesn't want to see a bunch of 6-10s on curve back to back to back. So I do think that depending on how people develop the NL deck, whether people kind of go a little bit too like mirror focused and control card advantage focused, a lot of these decks that were really scared of the 6-drops become a lot better.
Yeah, and just to latch on to what you were saying, also a lot of people started attacking for a Thriller Bark package to avoid the Perona locks with either Vary on one of the NLs they have up, or just running Reiju that's immune to the Perona lockdown. And this deck bypasses that because there's no Thriller Bark stuff to play around. It just counters efficiently and heals efficiently. And sometimes if you do run into a trigger, it's rarely and it's going to kill the Reiju anyways. So yeah, it kind of invalidates a lot of the tech spots given to in NL's deck construction to counter Nami.
Interesting. Well, I guess that's one of the other decks then that's going to be evolving as the meta progresses. So that'll be interesting to see. So I guess then we've kind of talked about the 2 biggest decks within this meta right now. I think that Lucy was one of the more represented decks in this meta, or in the Lille regional as well. But do you think that Lucy is in fact the 3rd best deck in the meta, or is there some other decks that you maybe have your eye on? And how close do you think these decks are to NL and Nami in terms of strength?
Personally, I think that the gap between the first 2 decks is pretty wide. I just don't think I'm going to be considering any other deck for any upcoming regionals. But if I had to choose a deck that's the 3rd best, I think I'd actually just put Red Green Luffy. I think that deck is probably the deck that has the most options in terms of like racing a lot or beating the other decks like very consistently, or not very consistently, but have a decent shot to beating both NL and Nami, and also kind of trounces a lot of the other matchups. It's a very skill expressive deck and it's quite difficult to play, but I think that's the deck I would probably be the 3rd most concerned about if I entered a room. But I think that moving forward, the Lucy deck gets worse and worse as more people kind of adopt Senior Pink, because the deck is just so focused on the 7-cost Sabo core, and it's just like very easy to remove with Gamma Knife. Like Gamma Knife plus a Shrink plus Elthor is removing, and the Gamma Mama we've already talked about many times about it being a very good answer to these big bodies. So all in all, I think it's the Red Green Luffy as the 3rd deck, and that's about it. How about you, Hrvoje?
Yeah, I agree. Like Lucy, I expect like more or less complete exodus of Lucy players, because despite the pretty good results it put up this weekend, like even one made into top 8. The fact is most of the NL players were not on the build we expect them to have in the future, which is just so focused on removal, and that build turns the Lucy matchup into pretty much a joke, because there's very little Lucy can do when they lose in that entire board quickly. Like their only win condition becomes hoping to like get some double attacks through and then cheese with Roger unblockable. Without that in the picture, like I really don't see a reason to play Lucy unless some innovation on deck building level occurs. How that would look like, I also don't know, because Lucy doesn't have any like directly unfair cards. The closest it has to one is, I think, Cavendish that gets to repeatedly swing. But to even stick a Cavendish, they need to go super wide. They have to go like Memento Cavendish into Sabo Memento Cavendish and then repeat the Sabo Memento Cavendish part a few times just to get the bodies to stick and maintain card advantage without like it already being too late. So yeah, I'm not sure how the Lucy players are going to handle it, but I do agree that Red Green Luffy is probably the third best option. I think it has a lot of elements that make a good deck for tournaments, and one of those is that it has a lot of the knowledge check parts on how to attack into it and how to also very importantly, how to lethal attack against it, because that's where people are definitely going to be making the most mistakes. And as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, attacking for lethal correctly is the type of mistake that feels the most impactful just because it can decide the game on the spot, even if it was like a 1k difference. Like if you made that mistake, you feel the impact the most because you lost the game. There's like no way of coming back from it. And the only other deck we really saw putting up solid results this weekend, there was a GP Luffy top 4 in Lille, but that's another deck that I expect to kind of fall off as more people adopt the Senor Ping Amaragan combo builds to just take out opposing boards.
Yeah, I think that's about it. How do you feel about Yellow Luffy? As fair warning, I was really happy about that deck last time we talked. But the more and more I played it, I was pretty unimpressed with how the yellow Enel or the purple Enel matchup was playing out, because I was still losing a lot of games. I was unable to enter the Holly. And even still, like there were a lot of like matchups that were still quite rough for the deck, mainly Nami as well. So I kind of gave up on the deck pretty quickly after like about a couple of days worth of testing. But I do think the deck's powerful. It just was slightly underpowered compared to Nami and Enel, and it kind of fell to a lot of the kind of like day one traps that I was expecting, which is mainly just like Electrical Luna and just Holly, which is like the two most common things people are going to be playing in this upcoming weekend.
Yeah, I have played a little bit of Yellow Luffy. It was one of those decks that I had a lot of faith in as well, especially in the beginning of the meta, because it seemed at least to be like the more clear NL counter. And the main problem that I had with the NL matchup was, in fact, that 3-cost Holly, as you're mentioning. So what I ended up doing was just teching in like the 4-cost Bella Betty, which KOs a 3-cost or less, and also the 2-cost Zeus. So just have as many easy deck building cost options to be able to get rid of that Holy to make sure that option that matchup is still good. But the issue is that even if you make that matchup fine, because of the abundance of Nami, we mentioned when we were making the tier list that a lot of Luffy's power is going to hinge on the power of Nami. And because Nami is very prevalent, and I think also it's probably going to become potentially even more prevalent as people realize that the deck is still very powerful despite not having the Borsuk Quasar combo, then I feel like that sort of deck's going to just suffer more and more, because I think it's one of those decks that is fine but has a very devastating popular matchup, and that's going to be enough to not get out of contention of being played.
Yeah, the last time we talked about it, I definitely rated it higher. Like, there was a lot more trepidation about the deck in testing, but as it turns out, the deck is just not consistent enough to, like, always hit. Like, if it could always hit its perfect curve, it would be a really, really good deck and a massive threat to NL. But its own consistency issues, the fact that Holy can win the race on the NL side, but also the fact that there is, like, this very annoying counterplay pattern to Secret Luffy, where if the Ohm sticks, you can just swing Ohm, Lightning Dragon, freeze it, and keep it frozen for as long as ohms are on the board. It made it like so NL is very solid at like just winning the race, which is what the matchup effectively boils down to. So yeah, the deck ended up underperforming to my expectations. The matches were like both Luca and I think played against 3 or 4 in Lille, and I don't think either of us dropped a match to them. So yeah, there was a lot more fear of the deck than perhaps was warranted in practice, just due to its own like host of inherent issues, then also paired with the deck's weaknesses against some other matchups which were already favored into it. So I think it's still a solid choice. Like, it's just a very simple go phase deck, kind of, that can turn to board somewhat, but maybe it's just not the time for it yet. Like, if Yellow gets really good control tools and this Luffy can play in a manner similar to current NL, where it can like control the board more, I can see this deck being like really, really insane, just because then it will kind of have everything. But at this point, it's kind of reduced to just being a very efficient race deck with consistency issues, and that's not necessarily a winning formula unless it's really your day. And I guess if it won the Treasure Cup, yeah, you can have your day in Swiss, but in Top Cut it gets a lot harder.
Yeah, I generally agree with that sentiment. There's one thing that you mentioned, about if it had control tools like NL, then it can be a lot better. I think that one of the reasons why this meta is very difficult to maybe like from a Bandai perspective balance is the fact that NL is the best deck, because Bandai has printed a lot of cards that are anti-removal, that can't be removed by effects, which in turn makes it so that power reduction is one of the most powerful things that you can do. And the thing is that power reduction right now is basically only in red and purple, I believe. I don't know if I'm missing some like random blue card or something. But red, just as a color, suffers a lot. And so therefore, the next best option, I mean, maybe even a better option if you look at things like Gamma Knife as well as Divine Departure, is purple. So purple, kind of the everything color, having access to power reduction, also having access to resting effects, just kind of feels like it can do everything. And NL, with cards that can search anything, just really feels like he is that miracle NL deck that Hrvoje has been mentioning. So I do think it's one of those things where, I mean, hope as we may, I'm not sure if yellow would actually get sort of those kinds of tools that can actually aid it.
Black also has power reduction. Just I think VV in Crocodile.
Oh yeah, I guess so, yeah.
They wanted mono yellow decks to be broken. They would have made Rayleigh not be multicolored locked. That card would be broken in a lot of these monocolored decks. But we can't have it all. Maybe one day. Any other decks that you guys want to talk about? I don't remember too much about what exactly made Top Cut in the Double Dawn event. But there were a lot of stray one-ofs in the Lille Top Cut, including like a blue-red VV, a yellow Anel, one red-green Luffy.
There was probably an ace.
There was an ace.
Wait, let me see if I can...
Yeah, there was exactly one ace, yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on yellow NL? We did see a really interesting stream game.
Mary TCG ended up playing yellow NL, and that game was ridiculous. I believe game one, purple NL tried to starve. Is that what the issue was, right? And they yellow NL ended up at like 7 life or something ridiculous.
Yeah, I haven't watched the stream game, so I'm not sure what happened, but I heard from Mary like that a lot of his opponents like either attacked wrong or just underestimated how fast his deck can get, because he's kind of playing the usual thriller bark package in NL, which just allows him to like every life a body comes out and it gets kind of difficult to race. I don't think it should be that good, but it has the old NL factor of if you don't know how to face it, it can just steamroll you, as I'm sure Yonas has done to many people in the past.
If I could play Omen Holly in the yellow NL deck too, I'd be a happy person. But I need to experiment with that deck some more. Mary's boasted a pretty like strong win rate against a lot of the popular decks, and if it's as good as he's saying it is, then that might be worth exploring more. I'm just worried about playing a deck as kind of clunky as NL is right now, just because you just kind of hope to draw the Rygos and the Rygo matchups and try to dodge drawing them against NL, and just hope your kind of curve lines up well against your opponent. And instead of that, I could just be playing a deck like NL, which gives me a lot more options in any given moment and a lot more card selection, which in general is going to lead to more win games. But obviously the power of a good curve, even when it's top end, especially when it's top end, is just going to beat a lot of good draws regardless. But that's not consistent enough for me when all you really want to do is try to make Top Cut and get to the best of 3 format, in my opinion.
But Mary's the GOAT. I saw he was cast as live action Satori, so big congratulations to him.
Yeah, I mean, it was enough on the day for sure. It was able to get Top Cut, was able to win off of time several times, just Lucy not being able to create very many attacks if you just keep healing. Then even if you're board 0, eventually, or sorry, not off of time, off of decking out the opponent, Yeah.
Deck out.
Like eventually, if you swing with Cavendish enough times, you are going to end up losing. So definitely exploited people's knowledge gaps. A lot of players that haven't experienced NL back in OP05, experiencing it for the first time in OP15 and realizing that they actually need to hit multiple times in a turn to actually get through that last life. Bit of a knowledge check. And especially in this first tournament, as people are still trying to figure out the meta, it was enough. So congrats to you, Mary. Once again, shout out to him, who I've heard is much less unhinged in person than he is on Twitter. So congrats to him. There is one deck, which I have actually... Oh.
Do you know he's actually an event winner? He won a Treasure Cup, I think, in OP6 or 7. So, he's an actual event winner, a very chill dude. But yeah, he does put on a persona on Twitter.
Yeah. The one deck that we have, at least in Japan, we've seen lots of yellow NL discussion. Basically, whenever I see anyone coping yellow NL, this feels like the Green Bonnie thing, where every single set people are like, oh, what about this time though? And I always kind of disregard it. And but a yellow NL did do well. One deck that I haven't seen anyone talk about in the East at all, which I just wanted to ask you guys about, because I haven't actually been able to see a deck list, though probably I can find it if I look it up, is Vivi. How did that deck do on the day?
I know it lost immediately in top 32, but I have not done any real research since I saw it make top cut about the deck list or what good matchups it boasts, to be completely honest.
Yeah,
but
I haven't seen... Yeah, no, I haven't seen any Twitter reports either, but I just assume it involved seeing very little NL, because that felt like the matchup that Vivi is like pretty much doomed against, and I don't know what it lost against in Top Cut, but I would assume it was an L, because yeah, that's what the gatekeepers do. They gatekeep out decks like Vivi. But yeah, I haven't seen if there was a Twitter post or something about the player who topped. Like, props to... Actually, no. I think he lost to the guy going up against Enrico in top 16. And Enrico played against... Oh, I don't know. I can probably dig it up. We should have the table, because I remember them being 16-17.
While he's doing that, Kai, do you find any promise, kind of on a theoretical basis, for Vivi?
I'm looking at the list right now. It does. I appreciate that it's actually playing towards the Alabasta engine, not just like the good stuff thing. It makes me feel a little bit happy that some of those cards are actually working. But it runs lots of removal. It has Rayleigh, it has Beckman, it has the 10 cost removal Shanks, it has Gravity Blade. Definitely feels like just to dodge the NL sort of deck. So maybe that's exactly what happened on the day. But disregarding this NL matchup, then would you say that maybe the deck has legs within the meta? Maybe it's kind of hard to say without actually testing it.
Hard removal seems pretty annoying for Nami specifically. Sky Luffy also doesn't seem like the best matchup either. Is like my other concern. Unless you're able to kind of have enough swings to muster to bully a 2K body that's rested. But aside from the searchers, I'm not sure if you have that much to kind of make that happen.
Yeah, I assume though that having on-play effects on characters that are going to get rush, and those on-play effects effectively turn into burn your opponent's life, shouldn't be too bad against Sky Luffy. I'm not sure how it ends up working out on paper, but if you're playing Beckman, and that Beckman says burn your opponent's life and then swing 7k rush, it cannot be that bad, right?
That's true. And an 8-cost double attack is not going to hurt either.
Yeah, that's probably going to be really good in the race, because it's make your own holy, but 10 times bigger. Or it's not going to die on the crackback, at least. But I also see some interesting tech cards. I think I haven't seen anybody run Phoenix Pyre-Apple. Not even in Marco, really, I think. And this has how many copies? 2. And also abusing, of course, maybe the best blue card currently in the game, which is Cavendish.
I have to try this out later, I'll be completely honest. But the NL matchup is the only one that really gives me a lot of pause. So if that matchup seems somewhat playable, especially against just people who don't know how to play against this deck, I can see it being kind of reasonable to bring.
Yeah, it does seem very scary on paper, though. So I guess we'll have to get back to you guys on that, listening to this podcast, and see exactly how good this deck is. But yeah, I think for the most part, though, that covers all of the decks that I was curious about, at least from the top cut. And I think that we've kind of encapsulated the meta more or less as a whole. It does feel like there's a lot of almost playable decks. It's jungly on the surface, but as you sort of reach the top, there's only a couple of decks that are actually standing. So is there anything else that you guys want to talk about, any specific decks? I know that we forgot to talk about things like Teach in the past, but is there any deck specifically that you guys want to talk about that maybe come relevant within this meta?
That's a really difficult prediction to make. I think maybe there is something in green. I see Raftera hyping up Bonnie now on Twitter, but again, I think he's overestimating their capacity to deal with the top decks somewhat. But green is like currently the underdog color. I feel both Mihawk and Bonnie have pretty much disappeared off the map, but they have generically strong leader abilities and like some really good top end. I do think the reliance on top end in general is just a weakness in the current format, but maybe there's something there. Like Bonnie can go pretty wide with like 8 cost Mihawk, and that's a respectable thing to put on board. But yeah, I think it's just guesswork if we try to say what's going to be good at this stage and what isn't. Green is just the first that comes to my mind that might actually have some legs.
If I know you talked about Teach, and I'm not too threatened of Teach as like someone who played an L. I did beat one, but I was fortunate enough to win die roll. But I can see a world where if your Teach opponent kind of draws the ideal curve of like Dot Q into Shiryu, it can be pretty difficult for a Nell to kind of build a reasonable enough board before the 10-drop chain kind of ends up overwhelming. So that's like the one matchup I think is like kind of like can be kind of scary if you lose die roll, but Anel kind of has a lot of the blue Dofi vibes of you can still get a lot of sixes in basically every turn, and you can very easily kind of overtax Blackbeard's hand by just forcing them to use leader effect every turn because all your on players are just so ridiculous. So I don't think Teach is that scary, but it does require like a lot of knowledge about how to play the Teach versus the NL matchup. And trying to take the game super slowly from the NL matchup can definitely catch you off guard and you could just lose. FYI, just do not starve Teach as NL. You will just die. Unless something weird happens in the early game, but...
Also, I kind of always assumed, I'm not sure if it's correct, that Teach completely dies to the yellow decks like Algara and Sky Luffy that just go full aggro, because I'm not sure how true that is, but I would expect Algara to completely stomp Teach. And I guess Sky Luffy as well. Like, what are you supposed to do about blanket protection placed on characters? But on the other hand, he does dog walk decks like Nami, or just more traditional on-play decks. So, but yeah, as an L in testing, I have never really felt threatened by Teach. Like even the super high roll, there's like some pivots you can do to like starve them in certain positions and ensure either your own plays go through or they don't deny you or they don't develop their big units that matter. So I felt like a very, very one-sided matchup.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. There is one way to get around Yellow Luffy's blanket protection. It just comes on a little bit late, and that is to just negate their leader effect. So if you get to that point, maybe something to consider. But yeah, I do think Teach, I'm more excited for Black-Yellow Teach next set, so we'll see exactly how that ends up turning out. There is one deck, though. So we talked about one of the, or maybe something that I mentioned before, was one of the oppressive things about NL is the fact that he has power reduction and also the ability to rest characters so that he can basically just attack the opponent's characters that were just played, making it very difficult for the opponent to establish their board. And even if you do protect it, there's the chance that they end up locking it with things like Lightning Dragon. I think the reason why a deck like Lucy suffers a lot into Enel is that they're at the mercy of when Enel decides to rest their characters, and that's when you start using your Fire Fists. And so I was just thinking about the question that I asked you guys about a deck that could potentially be good, and Hrvoje was saying it's very difficult to actually answer that question. But I have the Cope in my mind whispering to me once again, and I was thinking about a red deck that has power reduction and also has the ability to attack the opponent's characters that were just played. And maybe red-black Kobe, being able to attack into active characters. You drop something like 4-cost Doll, you attack into their active characters, you can deal with Enel a little bit. You also have removal to deal with Nami, and things like Yellow Luffy started falling out of the meta. Maybe something. I don't know how you do against like every other matchup, but if we're looking specifically at those top two matchups, then there might be some hope there.
The two concerns I have, I think Kobe might be fine against the NL deck specifically. The two main concerns that I have is one, I don't think that trying to fight board against Nami is that productive, especially when all the on KOs are very annoying for you, especially in the Thriller Bark core. Like attacking into Nami and Hogback is going to be miserable. And 7 cost Robin's obviously bad. And I think you take a lot of collateral damage against the green decks and their Lunas. Then again, I'm not really that worried about the green decks, but like obviously like Mihawk and Red Green Luffy are still gonna be pretty popular. So like those are my 2 main concerns. I'm not entirely sure those are enough to be like grounds to never consider the Kobe deck, but those are the 2 things that kind of pop to my mind in terms of what potential downsides this Kobe deck might have.
Yeah, I can think of a few cute playlines it has gotten recently. I guess it only got 1 new card that actually introduces those playlines, being the new Helmeppo 2K, which lets him play like the Boca Rebecca and then bring out the Hibari active immediately, which I think is like a really high value play. But yeah, the problem comes out with these decks that try to go kind of wide but with smaller bodies and half contest the board. You run into the same barrier a lot of other decks, notably yellow ones, run into, which is the blue yellow Nami, just putting up a 7k wall and healing every turn and having these bodies you kind of don't want to kill because they apply even more pressure on you, like the Nami and the Robin. So, and eventually Namis now go to really big units as well, like Newgate. I'm not sure. There might be something more to that deck. I cannot say I have tested it like truly. So maybe some future time, but I'm generally reluctant to play decks which have such obvious ways to abuse them. And again, I'm not sure it actually has an efficient way to deal with like 6 cost and L spam.
Yeah, I do think it's just pure cope, but I think it's if we're looking at all of the cope decks, I'd rather be playing Kobe than something like I don't know, Purple Kaido right now, for example. Oh no, Purple Kaido's not even usable anymore. No.
Yeah, it's rotated. Yeah.
Wait, Onegashima's Island is just gone now, right? We don't even have a replacement.
And importantly for Nell, Blast Breath is gone. So the best you can do is Flame Dragon Torch at this point, which might be secret. Who knows? I haven't tested it even though I wanted to. So, maybe something worth trying out with Senor Pink in tow.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Your events only protect animals anyway. So I think having that sort of thing that can only protect your leader might not be the worst, especially with how easy it is to get that 1 extra active dong. So maybe something to consider in the time to come, but we'll have to see, I guess. Well, in any case, we'll see how the OP15 meta evolves more. We now don't have the blueprint of the East showing some of the framework for the meta, so it'll just be up to the West and the East at the same time now for the first time ever, discovering the meta as we go, and we'll see what ends up becoming the best deck in the format towards the end and how it's going to end up changing with things like OP16, honestly, pretty close around the corner as the speed of releases has been getting closer and closer, getting towards that simultaneously. So I hope that you guys are excited as we are. Thank you guys so much for watching this installment of the All Blue Podcast. Make sure to like and subscribe, and let us know, of course, in the tweet that's going to be in the description of this video, hopefully, your questions for the podcast, and maybe we'll answer it next time. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.